It was 1 year ago in this very same Global Fashion Summit that one of the participants was mentioning how he had never seen so many experts in textiles-related policies gathered in the same space. And I believe the very same is true for this 2024 edition. And we're lucky enough to have 3 of them sitting with us here on stage. Please join me in welcoming first Nate Herman, Senior Vice President Policy with the American Apparel and Footwear Association, AAFA. Hi, Nate. Next to him, we have Duvan Ocampo, Acting Ambassador of Colombia in Denmark. And last, but certainly not least, Bárbara Peñafiel, Circular Economy Policy Coordinator with the Chilean Ministry of the Environment. Welcome. Let's go straight into this fascinating discussion on how to reach global alignment for a global sector. All right, Colombia, one of the countries in the Americas with the strongest agenda to promote circular economy. Can you tell us a bit more about that, Duvan? What are the main initiatives impacting the textile sector?
Okay, thank you, Maria, for inviting me. Indeed, Colombia was the first country in Latin America and the Caribbean to have an actual strategy at the national level for circular economy. And just 1 month ago, in March 2024, the first country in the Americas to have a payment per results fund. So in many ways, true, we're leading the way, but we're not doing it alone. We're working with different partners, mainly through the cooperation, for example, with Germany, with the GIZ from Germany, but also with important partners like Chile, Spain, and the Netherlands. And the fact that we're now, since 2020, a OECD country has led us also to be able to explore in that specific area, in that specific partnership, more possibilities for expanding and elevating on standards in terms of circular economy.
That's great, Duvan. Thank you so much. And you were mentioning Chile. Let's stay in South America with you, Bárbara. You were mentioning during our prep call how the interest for circular economy for textiles has risen a lot in the past 2 years, and there's many interesting things happening. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, we've been working on textiles for the past 2 years in the Ministry of Environment of Chile, driven by not only the illegal dumping of textiles in the Atacama Desert, but also because we need this change from this linear economy to a circular one. And we are working in 2 things, mainly. First one, we have a voluntary agreement with public and private sector for collecting more information about textile sector, for a new EPR scheme that it's going to be implemented in the former years. And they will be piloting also the collection and recovery of textiles. And on the other hand, we are also working on a national strategy of circular economy specific for textiles, which address the full cycle of textiles, and that take actions on the top of the waste management hierarchy. So we are addressing things like education, prevention, reuse, repair for textiles. And so those are the mainly things we are working on, and EPR is also one of these main pieces of regulation we will have in the next years for the country.
There's plenty of initiatives, right? And so interesting to see how it sounds like the EU a few years back with so much on the pipes, still in the making. We'll go deeper into that. Thank you so much, Bárbara. Let's move to the US. So AAFA is an organization with a very broad membership. You're following plenty of initiatives for them, right, Nate? I was wondering if you could speak about the main ones that have been keeping you busiest, let's say, since the last Global Fashion Summit.
Yeah, there's lots of legislation happening. Even though Washington, D.C., many people feel is broken and not working, what has happened in our industry, particularly in the sustainability space, as there's been a lot of regulation and legislation at the state level in the United States. So since last year, Right after the event here last year, California passed the first ever climate reporting legislation that exists in the United States. And so that's in place and will be implemented over the next few years. We have extended producer responsibility legislation, or EPR legislation, in California, which we expect to be approved by the end of the summer. And that'll be a watershed moment that is focused specifically on apparel and footwear. So it'll be the first ever EPR program in North America or in the Western Hemisphere that's specifically focused on apparel and footwear. We have been dealing with something called the Fashion Act in New York State, which might not get over the finish line this year, but there's a lot of interest not only in New York, but in Washington State and California to pass legislation next year. And this is the closest we have to the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive in the United States. But it goes further than the Due Diligence Directive because it actually requires goals to be set, standards to be met, and so it goes further. And then finally, I would be remiss if I did not mention the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act and enforcement of the forced labor statute in the United States, which is still a huge issue and continues to be enforced and have a huge impact on the industry.
Thank you. EPR, one of these wonderful EU acronyms, right? Or not only EU, like the ones that we hear everywhere. So extended producer responsibility, the polluter pays principle is very much at the forefront of the news. It's the case in the EU with the revision of the Waste Framework Directive. It's also the case in the US with this legislation in California that you mentioned. And there's also many countries implementing extended producer responsibility schemes at national level. Bárbara, you already mentioned the situation in the Atacama Desert. It's an image that comes to the minds of many of us when we think about Chile, those piles of textiles. How can EPR help tackle the issue there?
Yes, Chile is an importer country. We import almost the 90% of our textiles, clothing and other textiles. And we are on the top of second-hand using clothes imports. And 40% of these imports came from the north, in the north part of Chile, that's called Iquique, that is near the Atacama Desert. And it has absence of some tariffs, so there is a lot of coming in there. And while it generates both formal and informal employment, given the lack of classification at origin of these textiles, we are having a really crowded thing, and there is an inadequate management of the textile waste. So there is a dumping site. It's a very big one. And so there is a need for regulation, not only EPR. EPR is one regulation that can address some part of the problem with the collection and the valorization of those textiles, but also we need some global standards for importers and for the other, for exporters too. So we need to go global with the standards that are met by all countries. So I think we have EPR for the waste that is already in the country, but also we need to go further with some other regulation.
Thank you, María. EPR is indeed a complicated topic itself. As you mentioned, it involves many different kinds of actors. I think it's even more complicated in the US, right? Because the law right now comes from California, but what about other states? How do we make sure there's not a fragmentation here?
Right, and that's a great question. And that is a big issue in the United States, but also when we're talking about, sustainability is a global issue. It's not an issue in Chile or Colombia or the United States. And so you need to approach it globally. But if you have a mishmash of regulations that are all a little bit different, even if they're pushing the industry forward on the same issues, you create a lot of work and a lot of time wasted on compliance and a lot of time and resources that could be used instead to move the ball forward and make the industry more sustainable. And so that EPR is a great example of that. While California might move forward this year, we've already seen legislation in New York State. We expect if California passes it this year, we're expecting a huge amount of new regulation at the state level next year after the elections we have in the United States. And so we expect EPR bills in multiple states. All of them are going to be a little bit different than California. And so it makes it very hard as an industry to meet those regulations and very confusing. We've already seen this in the regulation of chemicals, particularly with PFAS or PFAS, which is a forever chemical, where every state that's passed regulations on it, every regulation is a little bit different, which creates a lot of confusion, a lot of wasted resources, and does not solve the problem.
Thank you, Nate. Collaboration is an obvious unlock here. You were mentioning many partnerships that you're engaging in. Duanas, Colombia, what are the learnings so far?
Okay, expanding on partnerships. I mentioned that one of our key partners is GIZ, so Gesellschaft für internationale Zusammenarbeit, in which we have mainly two projects, one starting in November 2022, another in February 2023. One has an approach, much like you mentioned, Nate, which could be somehow top-bottom, and the other bottom-up. From the top-bottom side, there is the so-called Go Circular project, and on the bottom-up side is the Pro-Use project. And what does it relate to? To engaging all aspects of the chain of producing and recycling and reusing. And that's being done, as I said, using OECD standards with the cooperation of Germany. But on the other hand, that has helped us to understand the regulatory framework better. And right now, there are 3 law projects in our Congress being evaluated, being debated, mainly for textile debris, textile residues, and also a transformation that we're trying to do, profiting from the fact that Colombia is probably the country with the biggest wealth in terms of natural fibers worldwide per square kilometer. So to try to make a move towards more use of natural fibers. That's in the works, truly, but there are some companies that are already doing it. And just to finish with this, not only we have intermestic partnerships with abroad, but inside Colombia, within Colombia, for example, we have a pioneering so-called circular fashion network in our capital, Bogota, to which many companies have joined, in which basically knowing that the textile and apparel sector is the biggest manufacturing employer in Colombia, to try to spread it all over the production chain and make an actual circular economy, profiting from the fact that manufacturing industry in textile and apparel, it could be the leading sector in this transformation in Colombia.
Thank you so much, Jovan. So many great points in there. Let's go back to our theme, right? Unlocking the next level. That's what it's about in this 2024 edition. And it's a theme that I'm personally very excited about as Global Fashion Agenda's Public Affairs Director, because I believe it's a theme that basically reflects where we stand in terms of legislation today. Picture for a second the sustainability impact as a safe deposit box. All we need to unlock the box is basically the right combination. And the same is true for the fashion sector. We have 80 pieces of legislation or more impacting the sector globally. And if we apply them correctly, we crack the code and we unlock the next level. It sounds simple, right? Is it that simple, Nate? And if not, how do we do it together?
Yeah, I think the key is what you said, is we need to be working together. And so I'll give you an example. The climate reporting legislation that passed out of California at the end of last year, we were able to get a key provision added to that legislation that allowed the reporting, the actual reporting of your emissions, that's Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3, to be in a form that can be used in any jurisdiction. So as Europe brings on its climate reporting requirements, that you can use the same reporting in Europe as you do in California. It seems like a very small thing, but it's actually a big deal that you can use the same, you're using the same requirements in how you measure, same level of assurance, and then you can use the same reporting. It makes a world difference because then you're not focused all your time on different reporting.
Right.
You're focused on, okay, now that we know what our emissions are, how can we reduce them? And that's what we really want to get to. And so that's a very small step, but a very important step, and that's what we need to try and be doing together. So Global Fashion Agenda is bringing together everyone, all the stakeholders from the north, from the south, all types of stakeholders, obviously our members, but also governments and NGOs and others, and solutions providers, and that's what we need, is we need to all come together and come up with solutions that then are translated into regulation and legislation, and then we all work together to implement them.
I love that, yeah, indeed. Let's bring that together also to policy. Bárbara, what's your take?
Yes, collaboration is a key element for regulation. So actually in this national strategy for circular economy for textiles, we are working with over 30 entities, both private and public, to get to this proposal. And we are going to publish it for public consultation in the next few weeks, we hope so. And because we know that collaboration and the participation of everyone is needed for tackling this problem on textiles. And also, not only at national level, but also in the international one. We were talking before about these global standards that are needed and global regulation. So meeting spaces like this one and the other one we will be having in these 2 days are essential for the work we are doing. And also the Global Textile Policy Forum we are all working on. It could be a very interesting space to develop this common regulation and how to harmonize the things we are doing. There is a lot going on textiles in the different countries, so it must be a common goal for all of us to work together so companies can address regulation in the different countries. Yeah.
Absolutely, Bárbara, and so great to see that there's so many new alliances and collaborations between countries that have been established thanks to the work that we are doing through that Global Textiles Policy Forum that we launched in this very same summit last year. Thank you so much. Duvan, how do we do this together then?
How
do we do this together?
Yeah, I did not get the last.
How do we do this together? What's your
How do we
take
do
on
this
the-
together? I'll try to be brief. I'll tell you a little story. I live in Denmark now, and I'm quite impressed with the recycling here and also the approach to circular economy, not just textile and apparel in general. But then I think about my country. And first of all, Colombia was the country that introduced in the international agenda the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. Actually, people I work directly with were the minds behind it. And to us, the key SDG has always been number 12, sustainable production and consumption. But then you translate what you do here, what you see here, like a big company well regulated, to what happens in Colombia. In Colombia, it's a lot about cooperatives and about the actual families. Because I said the textile and apparel industry is the biggest manufacturing employer. So the same people who produce are also buying. So in that sense, it's already circular, and we can also be affected if our product is not good enough, it's not recyclable enough. And on the other hand, the people who actually do the recycling are just regular families that go at night and pick up what others would consider debris, to bring it to transformation plans. So our approach is much, much directly centered in the individual, because sometimes in Europe you don't even see where that debris is going. But we see it in many aspects almost every day. And in spite of that, we have probably the leading currents regulated of circular economy in the textile industry in Latin America. So I think that approach is worth considering in a North-South dialogue and also in a South-South dialogue.
Thank you so much, Juan. So many interesting points, right? Harmonization, collaboration, strategic partnerships. This is the 15th anniversary of the summit, right? And as we take stock on everything that we have done since the first one, definitely one of the key achievements is this global collaboration on policy. This is something that we've been increasing over the years. We mentioned that Global Textiles Policy Forum, so this is the initiative that we launched, gathering textiles associations and federations together with governments to make sure that there's collaboration globally on policy. There's many other interesting milestones of that forum coming. This was the Americas showcased today, but of course there's the rest of the globe as well. So we will make sure to raise all the other voices. And we also met yesterday during a leadership roundtable with interesting collaborations happening in there with namely the G7 presidency and many other things coming. So very excited about the work that is ahead of us. Thank you, Bárbara. Thank you, Duvan. Thank you, Nate. And see you all around for the rest of the summit.